You may take the house, the cars, and every dollar Thomas left behind, the woman said at my husband's funeral. After all, he wanted me to have it. I stood there in silence, holding a white rose that suddenly felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 70 years old, and until that morning, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my husband of 42 years. I was wrong. The funeral service was held on a cool October morning in Cedar Ridge, Ohio. The church parking lot was already full when my daughter Emily helped me out of the car. The maple trees surrounding the property had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and the crisp air carried the scent of fallen leaves. It should have been a day devoted to remembrance. Instead, it became something else entirely. The sanctuary was crowded with friends, neighbors, former co-workers, and relatives. Many of them approached me with kind words and gentle hugs. I thanked them politely, doing my best to maintain my composure. Thomas had passed away unexpectedly 3 weeks earlier. Even now, I still caught myself expecting to hear his footsteps in the hallway or his voice calling from the kitchen. Grief has a strange way of refusing to accept reality. I walked slowly toward the front pew, the seat reserved for immediate family. Then I stopped. Someone was already sitting there. Vanessa Blake, 38 years old. Perfect hair. Perfect black dress. Perfect smile. She looked completely comfortable in a place she had no business occupying. For a moment, I thought there had been some mistake. Then she crossed her legs and looked directly at me. The expression on her face told me everything. There was no mistake. She intended to be there. Emily tightened her grip on my arm. "Mom," she whispered, "let's just sit somewhere else." I nodded. I was too tired to argue. Too tired to create a scene. Too tired to fight. So, I moved to the second row. Vanessa watched me the entire time. The service began. The pastor spoke warmly about Thomas's generosity and dedication to his family. People smiled through their tears as stories were shared. I listened quietly, trying to focus on the man I had loved rather than the strange tension growing inside the room. But every few minutes, I noticed Vanessa turning around to look at me, almost as if she was waiting for something. After the final prayer, guests gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and refreshments. Small groups formed around the room. Conversations drifted between memories of Thomas and expressions of sympathy. I was speaking with an old family friend when I heard the sound of a glass being tapped. The room slowly fell silent. Vanessa stood near the center of the crowd holding a champagne-colored folder against her chest. "Thank you all for coming," she said confidently. Several people exchanged confused glances. She smiled and continued. "Thomas meant so much to me, more than most of you ever realized." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt every eye turn toward her, then toward me, then back again. Vanessa took a breath and lifted her chin. "Before everyone leaves, I want you to know that Thomas made his wishes very clear before he passed. He wanted me to continue the future we planned together." A murmur spread through the crowd. My stomach tightened. Emily stepped closer beside me. Vanessa's smile widened. "The estate will be handled soon, and everything is already being transferred according to his intentions." She looked directly at me when she said it. Everything. The room became painfully quiet. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew where to look. I stared at the floor for several seconds before raising my eyes again. Vanessa looked victorious. Certain. Untouchable. As if the story had already ended and she had won. Then an unfamiliar man in a dark gray suit appeared beside me and quietly slipped a sealed envelope into my hand. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "this was left for you. You should read it before anyone makes any assumptions." I looked down at the envelope. Written across the front in neat handwriting was a name I had never seen before. Eleanor Hayes. For several seconds, I simply stared at the envelope. The noise in the fellowship hall faded into the background until it sounded like distant rain. Eleanor Hayes. I read the name. Again. It meant nothing to me. I had never heard it before. Not from Thomas. Not from any member of his family. Not from any friend we had known during our 42 years together. My fingers tightened around the sealed paper. Beside me, Emily glanced down at the handwriting. "Who is Eleanor Hayes?" she asked quietly. "I do not know," I answered. It felt strange saying those words. There had been a time when I believed I knew everything important about my husband. We had raised children together, shared holidays, paid mortgages, sat through graduations and weddings, built a life one ordinary day at a time. Yet over the past few weeks, that certainty had begun to crumble. First with his unexpected passing, then with Vanessa, and now with a name that seemed to appear from nowhere. The man who had given me the envelope adjusted his glasses. He looked to be in his late 50s, with silver hair and a calm expression. "Mrs. Hayes," he said gently, "I strongly suggest you read it somewhere private." Before I could ask another question, he handed me a business card. Then he walked away into the crowd. I looked down at the card. The name printed on it was Daniel Mercer, Estate Administration Specialist. My heart skipped slightly. Estate Administration. The words carried more weight after Vanessa's public declaration. Across the room, she was still surrounded by a small circle of guests. Some appeared uncomfortable. Others seemed fascinated by the drama unfolding around them. Vanessa, however, looked perfectly at ease. She smiled as she spoke. She laughed lightly. She accepted condolences as if she belonged at the center of Thomas's story. Every now and then, her eyes drifted toward me, almost as if she expected me to challenge her. I did not. Instead, I slipped the envelope into my purse. Emily looked surprised. "You're not going to open it?" she asked. "Not here," I said. "Not in front of everyone." We left the church 20 minutes later. The drive back to my house felt longer than usual. October sunlight filtered through the windshield as rows of golden trees passed by outside. Neither of us spoke much. My thoughts kept circling around the same questions. Who was Eleanor Hayes? Why had someone waited until today to give me that envelope? And why had Thomas never mentioned any of it? When we finally pulled into my driveway, I noticed how quiet everything seemed. The house looked exactly as it always had. The white shutters, the front porch swing, the flower beds Thomas used to maintain every spring. Yet it no longer felt familiar. Grief changes places. It turns ordinary rooms into museums of memory. Emily followed me inside. I set my purse on the kitchen table and removed the envelope carefully. For a moment, I hesitated. Then I broke the seal. Inside was a single folded letter and a photocopy of what appeared to be a legal document. My pulse quickened. I unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was neat and deliberate. The first line immediately made my stomach drop. "If you are reading this, Margaret, then events have unfolded exactly as I feared they would." I stopped breathing for a second. It was Thomas's handwriting. I knew it instantly. The same handwriting from birthday cards, grocery lists, and notes left on the refrigerator for more than 4 decades. My hands trembled as I continued reading. "There is something you must know about Eleanor Hayes. More importantly, there is something Vanessa does not know." Emily leaned closer. Neither of us spoke. We simply stared at the page. Then I turned to the photocopied document beneath the letter and saw a date from 7 years earlier. At the very top, printed in bold letters, was a title that made my blood run cold. Confidential Family Trust Agreement. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Emily pulled out a chair and sat down across from me, but neither of us spoke for several moments. The ticking clock above the stove seemed unusually loud. I looked back at Thomas's letter and forced myself to continue reading. The next paragraph began with an apology. Thomas wrote that some truths were difficult to explain while a person was alive because explanations often sounded like excuses. He admitted that he had made mistakes during the final years of our marriage. He admitted that his decisions had created confusion, pain, and misunderstandings that would likely outlive him. Yet he insisted that one thing remained unchanged. He had never intended for me to lose the life we built together. My eyes moved to the next line. Eleanor Hayes must be found before any final decisions are made. Emily leaned forward. "Found?" she asked softly. "What does that mean?" I shook my head. I had no answer. The letter did not immediately explain who Eleanor was. Instead, Thomas instructed me to contact Daniel Mercer and arrange a meeting before discussing any inheritance matters with attorneys, financial advisors, or family members. The wording felt deliberate, almost urgent. Beneath the letter, the trust document contained pages of legal language that neither Emily nor I fully understood. Names of financial institutions, property descriptions, dates stretching back several years. I turned page after page searching for something familiar. Then I saw it. Eleanor Hayes appeared repeatedly throughout the document. Her name was listed alongside assets I had never heard of. A property in Vermont, an investment account in Denver, a trust fund established 7 years earlier. The numbers attached to those accounts were far larger than I expected. My stomach tightened. How could Thomas have managed all of this without ever mentioning it? The question lingered in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. Around 4 o'clock, my phone rang. The caller identification displayed a name I already expected. Vanessa Blake. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice sounded pleasant. Too pleasant. "Margaret, I wanted to check on you," she said. Today was emotional for everyone. I stared through the kitchen window at the empty backyard. "That is kind of you," I replied. "I also wanted to discuss practical matters," she continued. "There are several properties that will need attention soon. I think it would be best if we coordinated everything efficiently." The confidence in her voice caught my attention. She spoke as though ownership had already been decided, as though every legal question had already been answered. "That sounds premature," I said carefully. There was a brief silence. Then she laughed lightly. Thomas was very clear with me. Something about the statement bothered me more than it should have. Not because of what she said, because of how certain she sounded. People who genuinely possess the truth rarely feel the need to advertise it. After the call ended, I immediately contacted Daniel Mercer. He answered on the second ring. His voice remained calm and professional. When I mentioned the letter, he seemed relieved. "Good," he said. "That means the instructions were delivered correctly." "Who is Eleanor Hayes?" I asked. Another pause followed. "Mrs. Hayes," he said carefully, "that is a conversation we should have in person." My pulse quickened. "Is she related to Thomas?" "Yes." The answer came quickly. "Very closely related." I gripped the phone tighter. Every assumption I had formed during the past several hours suddenly shifted. Thomas had never mentioned a relative named Eleanor. Not once. Not in 42 years. Daniel suggested we meet the following morning at his office downtown. After ending the call, I returned to the trust documents and examined them again. Near the bottom of one page, hidden among signatures and legal references, I noticed something I had missed before. Beside Eleanor's name was a birth date. I read the numbers once, then twice, then a third time. Emily looked at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked. I slowly turned the document toward her. The date printed beside Eleanor Hayes' name was exactly the same date listed on Thomas's birth certificate. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Emily stared at the document as though the numbers might change if she looked long enough. I felt the same way. The birth date printed beside Eleanor Hayes was identical to Thomas's. Month, day, year. It could not be a coincidence. I lowered myself into the kitchen chair and rubbed my temples. My head was beginning to ache. For the first time since opening the envelope, I felt something beyond confusion. I felt uneasy. There are discoveries that answer questions, and there are discoveries that create even larger ones. This belonged firmly in the second category. Emily sat across from me, with the trust document spread between us. "Do you think it could be an error?" she asked. I shook my head. Legal documents are many things, but they are rarely careless, especially documents involving large amounts of money. I glanced again at Thomas's letter. He had written every word deliberately. He had known this information would shock me. He had also known I would keep searching. That realization lingered with me long after Emily left for the evening. Once the house became quiet again, I carried the documents into the living room. Outside, darkness settled over the neighborhood. The familiar hum of distant traffic drifted through the windows. I turned on a lamp beside Thomas's favorite chair and continued reading. Page after page revealed pieces of a financial world I never knew existed. Investment accounts, property records, trust transfers. Some dated back nearly a decade. Yet what unsettled me most was not the money. It was the repeated appearance of Eleanor Hayes. Her name seemed woven into everything. She was not a beneficiary mentioned in passing. She appeared central to the entire structure. Around 10 o'clock, I found myself standing in front of the hallway closet. Inside sat dozens of storage boxes filled with family records, tax returns, old photographs, medical files, retirement paperwork. If Eleanor truly had some connection to Thomas, perhaps evidence existed somewhere among the years we had shared together. I spent nearly 2 hours searching. Most of what I found was ordinary. Vacation photographs from Florida, Christmas cards from relatives, school records from Emily's childhood. Then, shortly before midnight, I opened a box I had not touched in years. Inside were old photo albums, the kind people used before everything lived on phones and computers. I sat cross-legged on the floor and slowly turned the pages. Birthdays, anniversaries, backyard barbecues, smiling faces frozen in time. Then one photograph made me stop. It had been taken more than 30 years ago. Thomas stood outside a small white house beside an elderly woman I did not recognize. He looked younger, happier. The woman rested one hand on his shoulder. On the back of the photograph, written in faded blue ink, were 4 simple words: Thomas and Aunt Eleanor. I stared at the handwriting. My pulse quickened. Aunt Eleanor. The name finally existed somewhere in reality. Not just on trust documents. Not just in mysterious letters. She had been a real person. Somehow, I had never heard Thomas mention her. That alone felt impossible. 42 years of marriage should have included conversations about aunts, about family history, about people who mattered. Yet I could not remember a single reference. Not one. The next morning arrived after very little sleep. By 9 o'clock, I was sitting across from Daniel Mercer in a quiet office overlooking downtown Cedar Ridge. He listened patiently as I placed the photograph on his desk. His expression changed immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. He picked up the picture carefully. "You found her," he said. "At least part of her story." My heartbeat accelerated. "Who was she?" I asked. Daniel studied the photograph for a moment before setting it down. Then he folded his hands and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "before we discuss the trust, there is something you need to understand. Eleanor Hayes was not Thomas's aunt. That was simply the story he told everyone. The truth is far more complicated." He opened a file drawer beside his desk and removed a thick manila folder. Across the tab was a name I now recognized instantly. Eleanor Hayes. Then Daniel slid the folder across the desk toward me and quietly said the words that changed everything once again. Eleanor Hayes was actually Thomas's mother. For several seconds, I could only stare at him. The words did not make sense. Thomas's mother had died years before I met him. At least that was what I had always believed. That was the story he told. That was the story his relatives repeated. That was the story woven into every piece of family history I had ever heard. Daniel seemed to understand my confusion. He opened the folder slowly and removed several documents. Some were decades old. Others appeared more recent. Thomas was born under difficult circumstances, he explained. His mother raised him alone for most of his childhood. The family considered her an embarrassment for reasons that seem foolish today. Over time, Thomas learned to keep her existence private. I looked down at a faded photograph clipped to one of the papers. The same woman from the picture I had found. Eleanor. She looked kind, ordinary, not at all like someone who should have been hidden from history. Why would he lie about something like this? I asked quietly. Daniel sighed. Because some secrets become habits. And habits become part of a person's identity. I lowered my eyes to the folder. The deeper I looked, the more complicated everything became. Eleanor had lived in Vermont for many years. Thomas visited her regularly, often under the pretense of business travel. He paid her bills, maintained her property, helped manage her medical care as she grew older. Yet somehow I had never known. A strange sadness settled over me. Not anger.
Not yet.
Just sadness. 42 years of marriage should have included the truth. Later that afternoon, I returned home carrying copies of the documents Daniel provided. The October sky had turned gray, and a steady rain tapped against the windshield during the drive. By the time I reached the house, I felt emotionally exhausted. Emily arrived shortly afterward. We spread everything across the dining room table and began organizing the records. Property deeds, trust agreements, letters, medical documents. Piece by piece, a hidden chapter of Thomas's life emerged. Then Emily found something neither of us expected. Tucked inside one of Eleanor's files was a recent handwritten note. The paper appeared fragile, but the handwriting remained clear. It was addressed to Thomas. I hesitated before reading it. The first few lines were simple. Eleanor thanked him for visiting. She mentioned a garden they had planted together years earlier. She talked about the weather. Then one sentence caught my attention immediately. I am relieved you finally protected Margaret from people who may try to take advantage of your passing. Emily looked up. Protected you? She asked. I nodded slowly and continued reading. Eleanor praised Thomas for creating safeguards within the trust. She wrote that he had worried for years about certain individuals gaining influence over his finances. He feared that after his death, those individuals might attempt to claim assets they had never earned. My heartbeat quickened. I already knew who Thomas had been worried about. Vanessa. For the first time since the funeral, something began to shift inside me. Until now, I had felt like someone chasing answers through a maze of secrets. But this was different. This was the first indication that Thomas had anticipated exactly what was happening. The trust had not been created accidentally. It had been designed.
Purposefully, carefully, deliberately.
Around 6 o'clock that evening, my phone buzzed with an incoming message. Vanessa. The text was short. The estate meeting is scheduled for Friday morning. I assume you will be attending. There was no sympathy in the message.
No wodems.
No concern. Only confidence. The kind of confidence people have when they believe victory is already guaranteed. I stared at the screen for several moments before setting the phone down. Then I looked back at Eleanor's note. One sentence near the bottom suddenly stood out. I had overlooked it before. The words were written in slightly darker ink, as though she wanted to emphasize them. Remember, Thomas. The final amendment must remain sealed until the official review. My pulse accelerated once again. Final amendment. I immediately searched through the stack of trust documents. There were references to amendments throughout the file. First Amendment, Second Amendment, Third Amendment. But nowhere could I find a final one. Not a single page. Not a single signature. Not a single explanation. It was missing. And somehow, I knew that whatever had been placed inside that final amendment was the reason Vanessa seemed so eager to take control before anyone else discovered the truth. The following morning arrived cold and gray. I woke before sunrise and sat alone at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The trust documents remained spread across the surface exactly where I had left them the night before. Every page seemed to raise new questions. Every answer uncovered another secret. Yet one thing had become increasingly clear. Thomas had expected something to happen after his passing. He had anticipated a struggle over his estate. More importantly, he had taken steps to prepare for it. At 8:30, Daniel Mercer called. His voice was calm as always. He informed me that additional records had been located in a secure archive connected to the trust. Some of the files dated back more than 20 years. Others were far more recent. I agreed to meet him immediately. During the drive downtown, rain tapped lightly against the windshield. The streets of Cedar Ridge looked unusually quiet. Small businesses were opening for the day. Commuters hurried along sidewalks carrying umbrellas. Everything appeared normal. Yet my entire understanding of the past 42 years felt increasingly uncertain. When I arrived at Daniel's office, he greeted me with a serious expression. A thick stack of folders sat waiting on the conference table. He opened the first file and slid several pages toward me. The documents showed financial transfers authorized by Thomas over many years. Some payments covered Eleanor's living expenses. Others funded property maintenance and medical care. Nothing appeared improper. In fact, everything suggested a son quietly caring for his mother. Then Daniel revealed something else. Several months before his death, Thomas had personally requested an independent review of every trust document and asset connected to the estate. The request included specific instructions regarding future challenges to ownership. Challenges from whom? I asked. Daniel folded his hands. He did not identify anyone by name, but he clearly believed someone might attempt to claim authority they did not legally possess. I immediately thought of Vanessa. Her confidence at the funeral suddenly seemed less impressive and more suspicious. If Thomas had anticipated conflict, perhaps he already understood exactly how she would behave. As our meeting continued, Daniel presented another piece of information. A sealed package had been delivered to his office nearly 6 months earlier. Thomas instructed that it remain unopened until after the official estate review scheduled for Friday. My heartbeat quickened. Is that the final amendment? I asked. Daniel nodded slowly. I believe it is. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The package sat inside a locked drawer only a few feet away. The answers I had been searching for might already exist inside that envelope. Yet legal procedures required it remain sealed until the formal review. The timing frustrated me. At the same time, it reassured me. Whatever Thomas intended would soon become impossible to hide. As I prepared to leave, my phone vibrated. Another message from Vanessa. This one was longer. She explained that several financial matters required immediate attention and suggested we discuss transferring certain accounts before Friday's meeting. The request struck me as unusually urgent, almost desperate. I read the message twice before showing it to Daniel. His expression darkened slightly. Do not sign anything, he said firmly. Do not authorize any transfers. And do not allow anyone to pressure you into quick decisions. I promised I would not. That afternoon, I returned home feeling more alert than I had in weeks. For the first time since the funeral, I sensed the balance beginning to shift. Vanessa believed she was moving toward victory. She believed time was on her side. But hidden beneath years of secrecy, trust agreements, and family history was something she clearly did not understand. As evening settled over the neighborhood, I opened Thomas's letter once more. Near the bottom of the final page, I noticed a sentence I had overlooked before. It was short, simple, almost easy to miss. Yet it stopped me cold. If Vanessa becomes impatient before the review, you will know the amendment is working exactly as intended. Friday morning arrived with a clear sky and a sharp autumn breeze. The official estate review was scheduled for 10 o'clock, but I arrived nearly 30 minutes early. Daniel's office occupied the top floor of a brick building overlooking the courthouse square. From the conference room window, I could see people crossing the sidewalks below, completely unaware that a quiet battle was about to unfold several stories above them. Daniel greeted me with a nod and offered coffee. I declined. My stomach was too unsettled for anything except answers. One by one, the other participants arrived. Financial advisors, legal representatives, a trust administrator. Then Vanessa entered. She wore a tailored navy suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone attending a victory celebration rather than a legal review. Her smile appeared polished and effortless. When she saw me, she offered a brief nod. Margaret, she said warmly, I hope you are holding up. The concern in her voice sounded rehearsed. As well as can be expected, I replied. Vanessa took a seat near the head of the table. She placed several folders in front of her and immediately began discussing timelines, asset transfers, and administrative details with remarkable familiarity. It was almost as though she expected the meeting to confirm decisions already made. Throughout the first hour, various documents were reviewed. Property records, account summaries, trust statements. I listened quietly. The more Vanessa spoke, the more impatient she seemed to become. Every discussion eventually circled back to the same question. When would the remaining assets be transferred? When would final authority be established? When would outstanding restrictions be removed? Each time, Daniel calmly explained that additional documentation still required review. Vanessa's smile gradually tightened. Around 11:30, the trust administrator finished presenting a summary of existing assets. Silence settled across the room. Daniel then opened a drawer beside him and removed a sealed package. The room immediately grew still. My pulse quickened. I recognized the envelope at once. The final amendment. Vanessa noticed it too. Her posture changed almost instantly. Daniel placed the package on the conference table and carefully broke the seal. No one spoke. Even the sound of paper unfolding seemed unusually loud. He reviewed the contents for several moments before looking up. His expression remained professional, but I noticed something else. Relief. Then he began reading. The amendment confirmed several existing trust provisions. It clarified ownership structures. It reaffirmed protections surrounding certain properties and financial accounts. Vanessa appeared increasingly uncomfortable with each paragraph. Then Daniel reached the section that mattered. In the event of my death, he read, all authority regarding trust distribution shall remain suspended until verification by the designated family representative. Vanessa frowned. What family representative? She interrupted. Daniel continued reading. The designated family representative shall be Eleanor Hayes, or her lawful successor. A heavy silence filled the room. Vanessa stared at him. That is impossible, she said. Daniel calmly turned another page. Eleanor Hayes served as the original protector of the trust. Following her passing, all rights transferred to her appointed successor. My heartbeat accelerated. I knew what was coming. Vanessa clearly did not. She crossed her arms and forced a smile. And who exactly is that successor? Daniel looked directly at her before answering. Margaret Hayes. For the first time since the funeral, Vanessa looked genuinely stunned. The confidence disappeared from her face. Several people around the table exchanged surprised glances. Daniel continued. Under the amendment, no major asset could be sold, transferred, reassigned, or claimed without approval from the successor trustee. Every safeguard Thomas established flowed through that authority. Every protection, every restriction, every final decision. The room remained silent as the implications settled in. Vanessa opened one of her folders and hurriedly flipped through documents. Her movements were no longer calm, no longer controlled. Thomas had anticipated everything. He had hidden the mechanism inside layers of trust provisions, family history, and legal protections that only revealed themselves at precisely the right moment. Then Daniel reached the final paragraph and quietly read a sentence that caused every person in the room to look up. Any individual who attempts to influence distribution through misrepresentation of authority shall be permanently excluded from receiving benefits under this trust. The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. No one moved. No one spoke. Vanessa sat frozen in her chair, staring at Daniel as though she had misheard him. The confidence she carried into the room had vanished completely. For weeks, perhaps even months, she had behaved as though the future belonged to her. Now the foundation beneath that certainty was beginning to crack. Daniel carefully placed the amendment on the table and continued reviewing the remaining provisions. Each paragraph revealed another layer of protection Thomas had built into the trust. Major properties could not be sold without approval. Investment accounts could not be redistributed without oversight. Significant decisions required documented authorization. The structure was meticulous, deliberate, thoughtful. I found myself wondering how long Thomas had spent planning it. Vanessa finally broke the silence. There has to be some mistake, she said. Her voice remained controlled, but the strain underneath was impossible to miss. Daniel looked up calmly. There is no mistake. She opened one of her folders and removed several papers. Thomas discussed his intentions with me directly. That may be true, Daniel replied, but legal authority rests with the documents, not private conversations. Several people around the table nodded quietly. Vanessa looked from face to face, searching for support that never came. The room had changed. Earlier, many people seemed uncertain about where things stood. Now the legal structure was becoming impossible to ignore. Facts were replacing assumptions. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Relief. The past few weeks had been filled with uncertainty, grief, and confusion. Every day seemed to uncover another secret. Yet beneath all of it, Thomas had left a path. Complicated though it was, the path existed. Daniel then introduced another document connected to the amendment. It contained a detailed record of correspondence between Thomas and Eleanor during the final years of her life. The letters revealed concerns about protecting family assets and preserving stability after his passing. More importantly, they revealed something else. Thomas repeatedly described me as the person he trusted most, to make fair decisions when he could no longer do so himself. Hearing those words affected me more than I expected. The room around me seemed to fade for a moment. During the weeks following his death, I had questioned almost everything. Our marriage, his choices, his honesty. Yet here, in his own words, was evidence that he had never intended to leave me vulnerable. He had simply hidden the protection inside a structure no one would think to examine until the proper time. Vanessa remained unusually quiet for the rest of the meeting. Occasionally, she reviewed documents or whispered with her attorney, but the certainty was gone. Near the end of the session, Daniel presented a final accounting summary. Several proposed asset transfers that had been submitted shortly after Thomas's passing were listed for review. My attention sharpened immediately. The requests had been filed before the trust review took place, before authority had been established, before anyone could have known the contents of the amendment. Daniel glanced toward Vanessa. These requests will require additional examination. The attorney beside her shifted uncomfortably. Vanessa said nothing, yet her expression revealed everything. She had expected events to move much faster. She had expected fewer obstacles. She had expected the future to unfold differently. As the meeting concluded, participants gathered their materials and prepared to leave. One by one, they exited the conference room. Eventually, only Daniel, Vanessa, and I remained. Vanessa stood slowly and collected her folders. For a moment, it looked as though she wanted to say something. Instead, she simply walked toward the door. Then she stopped. Without turning around, she asked a single question. Did Thomas ever tell you about the lake house? My heart skipped. Daniel looked surprised.
So did I.
I had never heard of any lake house. Not once. Vanessa finally turned toward me. The confidence was gone, but something else had taken its place. Unease. Then there is still something you do not know, she said quietly before walking out of the room. The drive home felt different after Vanessa's final comment. The lake house stayed on my mind the entire afternoon, not because of the property itself, but because of what it represented. Another secret. Another piece of Thomas's life that had remained hidden until now. By the time I reached home, the sun was beginning to set behind the trees lining our street. The familiar house looked unchanged, yet I no longer viewed it the same way. Too many assumptions had been proven wrong. Too many questions had emerged from places I never expected. That evening, I called Daniel and asked him directly about the lake house. There was a brief pause before he answered. I was hoping that subject would wait until next week, he admitted. Unfortunately, it appears we have reached that point sooner. My pulse quickened. So, it exists? I asked. Yes, he replied. And before you worry, Margaret, the property is not what Vanessa believes it is. The next morning, Daniel met me at a small office outside town. He arrived carrying another folder. At this point, I was almost afraid of folders. Each one seemed capable of rewriting another chapter of my life. Inside were photographs of a modest lakeside property located nearly 200 miles away. The cabin was simple, wooden, quiet, surrounded by pine trees and water. Nothing about it suggested luxury or hidden wealth. Yet the documents attached to it revealed something far more important. The property had never belonged to Vanessa. It had never even belonged directly to Thomas. Years earlier, Eleanor had transferred ownership into the trust structure as a family preservation asset. Thomas maintained it, paid taxes on it, and occasionally visited it. But legally, it existed entirely outside the claims Vanessa had been attempting to make. Daniel showed me maintenance records, correspondence, and trust directives connected to the cabin. Then he handed me one final letter. It was from Thomas, written less than a year before his passing. I unfolded the page carefully. His handwriting felt familiar now.
Panfeli familiar.
The letter explained that the cabin had been the place where Eleanor spent her happiest years. It was where she taught him to fish, where she shared family stories, where she reminded him that character mattered more than appearances. Near the end of the letter, Thomas wrote something that brought tears to my eyes. If you are reading this, Margaret, then I have probably left you with more confusion than comfort. For that, I am sorry. But I hope you eventually understand why I protected certain things the way I did. Not because I valued property. Not because I valued money. Because I valued the people I trusted. I read those words twice.
Then a third time.
The silence in the room felt gentle rather than heavy. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace. Not because every secret had been uncovered. Not because every question had been answered. But because the larger picture had finally become clear. Thomas had made mistakes. Some were significant. Some hurt deeply. Yet beneath the secrecy and confusion, he had spent years building safeguards designed to protect the people he loved. A week later, the estate proceedings officially concluded. The trust remained intact. The properties remained protected. The authority Thomas placed in my hands remained exactly where he intended it to be. Vanessa attended the final session, but spoke very little. The confidence she displayed at the funeral never returned. Facts had replaced assumptions. Documents had replaced stories. When the meeting ended, she quietly gathered her belongings and left without looking back. I never saw her again. Months later, I visited the lake house for the first time. The water was calm. The air smelled of pine and autumn leaves. I sat on the small wooden dock and watched the sunlight dance across the surface of the lake. There was no victory in that moment.
No celebration.
Only clarity. The strange thing about loss is that it often reveals truths that comfort never could. I arrived at that funeral believing one woman had claimed everything. In the end, everything changed because of one name. Not because that name unlocked wealth. Not because it delivered revenge. Because it revealed the truth. And sometimes, after all the noise fades away, the truth is the most valuable inheritance anyone can leave behind.